Tu madre cuando te parió y te quitó el mundo, corazón ella no te dio para amar segundo, corazón ella no te dio para amar segundo. Adiós querida, no quiero la vida, me la amargaste tú. Abre tu puerta cerrada, que en tu balcón luz no hay. El amor a ti te vela. Partemos rosa, partemos de aquí. Castelo, ponho cotovelo e uma fama descanso o olhar, e assim desfaço o novelo da azul e mar. A ribeira encosto a cabeça, almofada da cama do Tejo, com lençóis bordados à pressa, na cambraia de um beijo. Lisboa, menina e moça, menina da luz que os meus olhos veem, tão pura. Teus saios são as colinas, varina, pregão que me traz a porta, penura. Cidade de ponto luz, bordada, de barra estendida. Lisboa, menina moça amada, cidade mulher da minha vida. שכחות יקראוני יורד הים, אם עוד פעם יפית כל כך בעינייך אש בוערת ליבי כולו שלה. וז'נטו נמין ידך agora quero perceber esta tristeza que trago. Foi da voz que eu recebi.
Welcome, everyone. and a very special thank you for joining us here today for what is our largest audience to date. We are proud and privileged that our educational webinar efforts are well received by you, our special audience, culminating in today's event where we exceeded 1,800 registrations. What a splendid way to end off 2021. Thank you all. Before we get started, I would like to point out that we are not using the chat button and ask that you please send your questions and comments to the Q&A button on your screen. Okay, now let's get started. So, my name is Michael Steinberger, and I am founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, a platform dedicated to promoting the story of Sefarad. Jewish diaspora is an integral part of Jewish history, but as I've suggested in recent talks, the diaspora of Sefarad, the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, nowadays Spain and Portugal, stands apart. It is a far-reaching story with endless twists and turns that produce profound consequences, some of which are still playing out in present day right here in America and around the globe. We at Jewish Heritage Alliance believe that for all of its significance and relevance, the story of Sefarad lacks the attention it truly deserves. Jewish Heritage Alliance was created with a mission to research, capture, and promote the story of Sefarad on a global scale. To accomplish this mission, we created a strategic alliance partnering with various people, organizations, and institutions. The alliance allows us to expand our reach and broaden our scope, creating a voice of the collective as we are doing here today. So at this time, I would like to thank our co-hosting partners for helping us make this event a success. I would like to thank Fundación Hispano-Judaya, or the Hispanic Jewish Foundation, the Hadassah Brandeis Institute of Brandeis University, Anu Museum of the Jewish People, previously Bet Atfusot, the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, American Sephardi Federation and its Institute of Jewish Experience, the National Museum of American Jewish History, Centro de Estudios Judaicos de Tres os Montes, or the Center for Jewish Studies in Tres os Montes, the European Jewish Community Center, the Miller Center for Contemporary Judaic Studies, and the Feldenkrais Program in Judaic Studies at the University of Miami. We'd like to acknowledge Kulanu, and a special welcome to our newest co-hosting partner, Reconectar. The expulsion of 1492 shattered the unity of the Jews of Sefarad and forced them to make an agonizing choice. These ranged from going west into Portugal, converting to stay in Spain, or departing the Iberian Peninsula altogether. While their decisions led to different paths, they all had a common origin. Today's presentation examines the harrowing choices these people had to make and the consequences that followed. At this time, it is my privilege and honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Ron Duncan Hart. Ron is a cultural anthropologist from Indiana University with a postdoctoral work in Jewish studies at the University of Oxford. He is the director of Jewish Learning Channel and a former president of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. He has awards from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, Ford Foundation, Fulbright, and the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, among others. Ron has written several books on Jewish life and culture, and the most recent is Crypto Jews, The Long Journey Home. Take it away, Ron.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for that introduction. And welcome to those of you who are attending today. It's a pleasure to be with you as we talk about this critical junction in early modern Jewish history, and which is looking particularly at the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. So why is this important? Well, Spain had the largest Jewish population in Western Europe at the time, 150,000 Jews or more. It's difficult to get an accurate count. The expulsion decimated that population and fractured life in this most important Jewish society, which was the largest society in Western Europe. And it took many generations for Jewish life to rebuild in Western Europe after this. Sephardic Jewish life was scattered into a wide diaspora and would never again be the same. The expulsion was a prism that revealed fault lines within Spanish Jewish society between religious observance, wealth, and identity, and other factors. And today we'll look at how those factors affected the decisions of families to be or not to be Jewish. So the program today is going to be in three parts. As an anthropologist, I will first tell the basic story. Then Blanca Carrasco from a converso background and Isaac Amon from a traditional Sephardic Jewish background will each tell their family stories to complete the cycle of what happened to the descendants of the Jews of 1492. So with that, let's take a closer look at that year. Most Jewish families chose to leave Spain at the time of the expulsion to join Jewish communities around the Mediterranean world, which were mostly Muslim countries at the time. And others migrated into Poland and Eastern Europe. But some chose to stay in Spain and convert, including those who retained their Jewish practice in hiding, the crypto-Jews. So their descendants would eventually arrive to the Americas as hidden Jews in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, New Mexico, among other places. I became interested in this subject, living and doing research in Latin America, Spain, and Morocco for several decades, living within Sephardic communities, within a Sephardic family. And I currently live in New Mexico, where I have friends and close acquaintances who are from converso backgrounds. In the process of that experience, I've come to recognize outlines of a Sephardi converso continuum, however tenuous, from Istanbul and Tangier to El Paso and Santa Fe. Although it might seem incredulous, and it was to me in the beginning, how could descendants of those Jews who converted and stayed in Spain 500 years ago retain a thread of identity today? Well, I've interviewed many who have talked about how their family memories of Jewish heritage, however faint, arrived to them. And to me, that lends credibility to what we'll be talking about today. Through circuitous paths of memory and cultural traits, something has survived. Often the original meanings of long ago Jewish practices have slipped away in the midst of family histories. Repeatedly, I've heard that grandmother, or maybe it was an aunt, said we were Jewish, but I didn't know what that meant. Sometimes it starts with, I did not believe what I heard in the church, and I began to look for other alternatives, and I felt the attraction of Judaism. From these starting paths, many of this current generation are asking about how their family background might relate to this, and they've begun reclaiming Jewish heritage. So what did the medieval Spanish have against the Jews? The militant church and the religious fervor of the Crusades of the 12 and 1300s engendered Christian-only attitudes. Muslims had ruled parts of Spain for almost 800 years, until the last Muslim kingdom was defeated and its people left the country on January the 1st, 1492. The Christians had triumphed. 3 months later, on March the 31st, 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella issued the Alhambra decree, expelling Jews to create a new Christian-only Spain. Jews were no longer welcomed, even though they had lived there for 1,500 years, having arrived before the Muslims and before the Christians. Spain and the Spanish language became synonymous with being Christian. People still say, by the way, hablo cristiano, which means I speak Christian, when they refer to the Spanish language. So it's so fused, so identified with being Spanish and being Christian. From the perspective of the 21st century, we might ask, Why would Jews have chosen to stay in Spain and convert in 1492 in such an intolerant atmosphere, under the threat of arrest by the Inquisition, and even the threat of being burned at the stake, like thousands were? Although it might not seem logical today, tens of thousands of Jews made that choice in 1492 to stay and convert. Why do their descendants, the conversos of today, still feel Jewish 500 years later? Is it family, collective mind, DNA, primal gestalt, history, culture? We'll look at that. One of the stories of the drama of the expulsion that stands out to me is of two Jewish friends, and I would like to introduce them to you and tell a bit of their stories. They made opposite decisions about leaving or converting. One of those friends was Isaac Abarbanel, a name very important in Sephardic history. He was born in Portugal and later moved to Spain and became an important financial advisor in the royal court. And the other friend was Abraham Senior, who was an important advisor to Queen Isabella. They were in the, Abarbanel and Senior were in the royal court together, and they began to collaborate. They got to know each other. Abarbanel was the more religious of the two, and it seems that he was the more outspoken against the expulsion, but Abraham Senior was with him and backing him. Abarbanel wrote about how the Jewish community reacted on learning about the Edict of Expulsion, and his description of that is one that I think you should hear. And I quote, he said, "When the dreadful news reached the people, they mourned their fate. And wherever the report of the decree spread, Jews wept bitterly. The terror and the lamentation were greater than at any other time since the expulsion of our forefathers from their own soil in Judah to foreign lands." Abarbanel and Senior advocated that King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to not expel the Jews and to offer them, and they offered them a large amount of money to rescind the edict. But as we know, the monarchs did not accept the offer. Tomás Torquemada, the head of the Inquisition, is said to have intervened and denounced the offer as an example of the unchristian influence of Jews in Spain, even more evidence that Jews had to be expelled. Portugal was a different situation. In 1498, Jews were declared Christian by royal decree in Portugal rather than being expelled. So they were converted on a national level by fiat, against their will. That created a population of tens of thousands of Jews who never chose to convert, but were forcibly declared Christian. The anosim, the forced ones. When it was obvious that all was lost in Spain, Abarbanel, with the backing of Senior, is reported to have made a final statement to the king and queen. And again, I'd like to quote from that statement, from those words. So Abarbanel speaking says, "Your Majesties, Abraham Senior and I thank you for this opportunity to make our last statement on behalf of the Jewish communities that we represent. I find it difficult to understand how every Jewish man and woman and child can be a threat to the Catholic faith. Can we destroy you? It is indeed the opposite. Did you not admit in this edict to having confined all Jews to restricted quarters, not to mention forcing us to wear shameful badges? Did you not terrorize us day and night with your diabolical inquisition?" So in these words, we see Abarbanel standing up to and protesting what was happening. There were major protests at the time. Abarbanel and Senior's argument for the clemency for Jews resulted in a 2-day extension, nothing more, just a 2-day extension of the deadline to leave Spain, which moved the deadline from July the 31st to August the 2nd. That's the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. The expulsion of Jews from Spain joined the fall of the first and second temples on that day of sadness in the Jewish calendar. On August the 2nd, the deadline to leave, the harbor of Palos in southern Spain was congested with ships leaving with Jewish refugees. Christopher Columbus was in the same harbor that day, finalizing his famous voyage to the west. He and his crew sailed the next day. He reportedly obtained his 3 ships from converso ship owners. 4 of his crew members were conversos. One of them, Luis Torres, had decided to convert just before the voyage to be able to sail with Columbus because he wanted to see what was on the other side, what they might find. So rather than flee to safety to another country, Torres converted to join the voyage. Columbus' voyage had been partially financed by Jews who believed in his vision. When Jews involved with his mission at so many points, many asked if Columbus himself had a Jewish background. If he did, he knew how to hide it. But one of the reasons that there were so many Jews involved in that is because Jews had major roles in navigation and international commerce. So it was reasonable that Jews would be involved in this adventure. Under the pressure of the expulsion, Abraham Senior chose to stay in Spain and convert, as did his children, most of his brothers and sisters, and his son-in-law, a rabbi, Mayor Malamed. Senior converted in a formal ceremony on June the 15th, 1492, in Valladolid, Spain, with the king and queen acting as his personal sponsors. Senior changed his name to the Christian name Ferdinand Perez Coronel, as was common for Jews who converted, to change the name to a Christian name. But not all of the Senior family converted in 1492. Some of the family left Spain and kept their names. And along with other Sephardic Jews, they eventually became key brokers in the emerging mercantile age, first around the Mediterranean and then around the world. They became known as the port Jews because they were located in major ports on every continent, forming networks of international trade. And even into the current times, descendants of the Jewish side of the Senior family continue to follow the centuries-old occupation in international commerce. When I moved to Colombia as a senior Fulbright scholar, the Abraham Senior company in Barranquilla, Colombia, did the customs arrangements for me and my family. Later in Casablanca, I came to know a leading wine importer, Alan Senior. And so on the story goes, Lador Vador, the linkages from generation to generation. In contrast to the Senior family, Isaac Abarbanel and his family left for Italy with thousands of others to continue living as Jews. Abarbanel lived in Venice, along with other cities, and wrote commentaries on the Torah and the Tanakh, along with other theological works, which made him one of the important Jewish scholars of his time. Although Italy was the seat of Roman Catholicism, Jews continued to live there, and some Italian cities became places of refuge for the Jews from Spain. So, what caused one family to leave Spain and their wealth and power, while the other converted and continued their lives of wealth and influence? The most important reason is probably religious observance. The more observant Jews, like Isaac Abarbanel, seem to have been among the leaders in choosing to leave Spain rather than convert. But there were exceptions to this rule, of course, as there always are with humans. Wealthy family groups that were converting to stay often pulled in the observant members of the family to convert also, as we see in the case of the Senior family with the son-in-law who was a rabbi, and with many other families, by the way, this can be seen. Today, traditional religious observance is common among the Sephardic Jews of Morocco, a community that is still close to its Spanish heritage. Morocco is considered by many as the most traditional of the Sephardic communities, more closely linked to Spanish traditions. And Moroccan families proudly trace their ancestors back to the time of the expulsion, 500 years ago. Their language, culture, genealogies, and DNA linked them clearly to Spain. These are the Western Sephardim who formed openly Jewish communities in the Maghreb, from Morocco to Tunisia and Algeria, in cities such as Tangier and Tetuan. They are to be distinguished from the Eastern Sephardim, who formed communities in the Ottoman Empire, from Israel and Syria to Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans, with such famous Jewish cities as Aleppo, Salonika, Rhodes. Sephardic Jews prospered in the Ottoman Empire. They adapted to the local societies of Eastern Europe, the Balkans, Greece, and Turkey. Their adaptation of Spanish evolved into Ladino with the influence of the languages of the region. The Sephardim occupied important positions in Turkey. They were manufacturers, physicians, tax collectors, professors, and even advisors to the Sultan on occasion. Two of the famous Sephardic figures in the Ottoman Empire that I'd like for you to know about, and you may, I'm sure you've heard the names, Donia Gracia Naci and Joseph Caro. Donia Gracia was born in Portugal in 1510 to a crypto-Jewish family, but she later escaped and used her wealth and fleet of ships to save thousands of Sephardic Jews from persecution by the Inquisition by transporting them to the Ottoman Empire that welcomed Jews. She built factories, housing, and synagogues to provide these displaced Sephardim with communities where they could rebuild their Jewish lives. She pressured rabbis to challenge the Christian world where atrocities were committed against Jews. She was an extraordinary person and should be ranked as one of the most important Jewish leaders of the last 500 years. You can read more about her in Jane Gerber's book and other books that tell her story in much detail. The other important Sephardic figure that I'd like to mention was Joseph Caro. He was born in Toledo, Spain in 1488, and his family left for Portugal when Jews were expelled from Spain. But then, just a few years later, the forced conversions of 1498 in Portugal forced his family to leave for the Ottoman Empire. Later, he moved to Safed in Israel, where he lived. He had seen the disruption in the lives of the Sephardim, having been expelled from Spain, having lost synagogues and rabbis, and having been cut off from their sources of Jewish learning. To staunch this loss of knowledge of Jewish practice, he compiled the Shulchan Aruch, which became the standard code of Jewish law and continues to be used today. Okay, so let's go back to those who decided to convert in 1492 and take a look at the factors that would have triggered their decisions to stay in Spain. First, it seems to have been family. As we can document in the case of Abraham Señor and others, if your parents converted, you probably converted to stay with them. Family groups tended to convert together. Secondly, finances were an issue. Jews were not allowed to take gold or silver with them when they left Spain. And since they were given only a few months to dispose of their properties, wealthier people faced significant financial losses if they left. Did they convert to protect property and businesses and avoid catastrophic economic losses? On the other end of the economic spectrum, I wonder if some of the poor could have been trapped because they did not have funds to make an international move or leave Spain. So finances became a factor. Third was miscalculation. Some Jews might have thought that the expulsion would be short-term, as had happened previously in France and other countries, thinking that they could convert and wait it out until Jews were allowed back in the country. Many of them, like Jews in Germany in the 1930s, must have miscalculated or misunderstood about what was to come. Did the more pessimistic leave because they thought the worst could happen, and the more optimistic stay because they never believed it could get as bad as it did? A fourth factor in the conversion must have been feigned conversions, thinking that they could continue their Jewish practice in secret, in hiding from the Inquisition. Maimonides had written the Epistle on Martyrdom, providing the theological support for false conversions. He advocated that rather than die, a Jew should feign conversion to save his or her life and then move as soon as possible to a safer place to resume life as a practicing Jew. For the feigned conversion principle to work, Jewish converts would have had to leave Spain and Portugal soon and move to a place where they could resume living as Jews, or their children would assimilate and Jewish practice would be lost. As the reality of life under the Inquisition became more apparent, tens of thousands did leave Spain and Portugal in the 1500s, and following, and they moved then to reclaim their lives as openly practicing Jews. Many went to the Netherlands, such as the families of Baruch Spinoza, Menashe ben Israel, Isaac Amon da Fonseca, and many of the others, all born of Portuguese, Jewish, Anusim families. Others chose to leave Spain and Portugal to go to the colonies in the Americas, where the Inquisition was less powerful. But with no synagogues, rabbis, or Torah scrolls, Jewish life inevitably faded to more memory than practice. And their descendants did not have the opportunity to return to the practice of Judaism, as Maimonides had said. Even with those challenges, the memory of Jewish heritage continued for many in the Americas. I would like to mention that the anti-Semitism continues in Spain, not only from that time, but into the present. There's a significant level of anti-Semitism in Spain today. A recent Pew Research survey found that 29% of Spaniards are anti-Semitic attitudes. That's one of the highest rates in the Western world, 3 times that of the United States. Jewish Sefarad exists today in tourism, literature, and nostalgia for the past. But Jews in Spain still have problems with anti-Semitism. The Inquisition was a menacing presence hanging over Jewish conversos all through this process. Although converted, they were still considered Jews and were under suspicion as such. There are thousands and even tens of thousands of cases of people arrested by the Inquisition for Judaizing. 25 years ago, I sat in the Archivo Histórico Nacional, the National History Archives in Madrid, awaiting the first Inquisition trial transcript that I would read. It was of a midwife in her 80s who was arrested because she was accused of washing the baptismal water off new babies, which was a practice frequently reported from converso families. When they brought the original trial manuscript, an inches thick stack of parchment from this case, 500 years old, I sat in silence, literally, unable to open it in the beginning, contemplating what was on the table before me. A life in parchment, bound in ribbon. I saw the vulnerability of the 80-year-old woman whose years have been dedicated to bringing life into this world, and her own sentence of life or death in the hands of the inquisitors, who were Dominican priests, the gatekeepers of Catholic conformity. As I read through the manuscript, I saw her pleading age and infirmity to protect her life. And after a stern rebuke, her case was left in abeyance, not acquitted, but left open, a threat, a reminder of the power that she could be rearrested at any moment. In the thousands of cases against accused Judaizers in Spain and the Americas over the centuries, mothers and fathers were arrested because they did not eat pork, or maybe they took a bath on Friday. Maybe they did not work on Saturday, which was very common converso practice. It was all to erase the taint of Judaism from Christian lands. We know that the cases of assimilation mean that within 3 or 4 generations, people tend to assimilate into the majority society. And that seems to have happened among conversos in Spain. So by 1600, the number of people who were being arrested by the Inquisition began to drop dramatically. On the one hand, this suggests that there were few crypto-Jews left in Spain to prosecute because they were leaving for the Americas or elsewhere. And on the other, the focus of the Inquisition was shifting toward another new, more threatening heresy, that of Protestantism. Martin Luther and his 99 Theses began to threaten Catholic hegemony more than the Jews did. The surviving crypto-Jews built lives around hiding or camouflaging their Jewish identity and practices as they assimilated to the dominant Catholic society. Hebrew was lost, and with that, the prayers and songs that marked Jewish life. Religious rituals and holidays were synthesized with Catholic practices. Purim morphed into the fast of Esther, who was a hero of converso families because she had to hide her Judaism. And Moses was Catholicized as Saint Moses. Anisim families kept a semblance of kashrut by not eating pork, and some continued lighting candles on Friday night, well after the Hebrew prayers had been replaced by Catholic ones. A fusion culture evolved with Jewish elements camouflaged to look like Catholic elements. Among Jewish scholars, the question has come up about what happened to these people. Although the Sephardic Jews from the Ottoman Empire to the Maghreb and the Spanish-Portuguese Anisim in the Americas are linked by common ancestors, each has developed different cultural and religious paths over the last 500 years. The descendants of Sephardic Jews today live mostly in Israel and Latin America, and they're more adapted to Middle Eastern cultural patterns. The descendants of Anisim from the American Southwest into Latin America have Spanish and Portuguese speaking identities based on centuries of coexistence in Catholic societies. Although there's a chasm of cultural differences between the descendants of Sephardic Jews and the descendants of Anisim after 500 years, there is a movement today to find the path between those differences by thousands upon thousands of people from the Americas who are exploring the meaning of being descendants of Spanish and Portuguese Jews. In the first century after the expulsion, some crypto-Jews would have remembered enough of Jewish observance to continue hidden practice. But by the time we get to the present, there are no crypto-Jews with full-fledged Jewish practice. But what does exist is a spectrum of families with traces of practice on one end, to families with only the memory of the Jewish past on the other. Often the descendants of the Anisim who are claiming Jewish identity are not welcomed into existing Jewish communities, but they are a critical piece of the puzzle of Jewish life and history in North and South America today. How do we recreate connections between existing Jewish communities and the descendants of the Anisim who are returning to open Jewish identity and practice? The process of reconnecting to Jewish life is one of the compelling stories of contemporary Judaism. After lifetimes of secrecy and hiding Jewish traditions in the family, it takes a real commitment on the part of a person of a converso descent to take on public Jewish identity and publicly adopt a Jewish lifestyle. Their decision to become a Jew is an act of courage, sometimes challenged by other family members who still do not want their story to be public. Descendants of those who suffered pogroms at the hands of the Russians and the Holocaust at the hands of the Germans sometimes asked, "Why do you want to be Jewish?" The resistance of some in established synagogues to accepting those who want to reclaim Jewish identity can be a wound of rejection to those who are returning. Anti-clericalism was commonly a first step in the path of returning to Jewish identity. Later, when Protestant churches were permitted in Latin America, being Protestant became a second venue for breaking with the Catholic Church. After that, the movement of Messianic Jews sometimes became a third step. So returning Judaism occurs by steps. It's not one fait accompli. Eventually, these practices lead people to, in some cases, find a rabbi with an open door who will welcome them into Judaism, as we will see when Blanca Carrasco talks about her experience. In this movement to reclaim Jewish identity in the American Southwest and in parts of Latin America, many are asking, what is our place in that heritage? Others simply say, somos judíos. We are Jews. I would like to end today with a poem by author Isabel Medina Sandoval of Santa Fe, New Mexico, who is a returnee to Jewish identity and practice. Her poem is entitled Marginal Threads, and it says this, I quote, "On the fringe I wander, boundary of periphery, wondering just where I belong. Trailing Tarshish Tzitzit translate, Oye Israel, el eterno es nuestro, Dios el eterno uno es. On the border I wonder, bound by jaded Jews judging my Judaism, juggling their own justice. Rachel's reaching reboso renders, hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem, the one and only. Inside the talit, I have rights. Outside the reboso, I have a right to return. On the outside looking in, on the inside looking out. To other Jews, my soul is in a constant state of doubt. Insidious inside, let me in. Outrageous outside, let me out. On the edge I stand, not knowing why I do not understand. I want to thank those people who have shared their life stories and thoughts with me about their process of reclaiming their identity as Jews. Also, I would like to recognize the scholars who have been compiling this history for the last 30 years and more, starting with Jane Gerber and David Gitlitz, Stanley Hordes, Seth Kunin, Laura Arnold Liebman, and so many more. I would also like to recommend the excellent detailed programs on Sefarad by Dr. Isaac Amon earlier in this series of lectures. I think you'll find them deeply informative. If you'd like to read further about these matters, I can mention my own books on the subject, both of which are award-winning publications. One of them, Jews in the Arab World, you can see behind me, and the other, Crypto Jews. Now, Blanca Carrasco and Isaac Amon, who are both descendants of Spanish Jews, will talk about how these different histories have played out in their own lives. As you might be able to guess by now, Isaac will be able to talk about his family of Sephardic Jews from the Ottoman Empire in considerable detail, because they were living openly as Jews with photos and documents. Blanca comes from a converso background where the details were hidden. She does not have the photos or the documents. Her story is more one of exploring and establishing, asking questions. What was our family background? Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to the next part in the program. Michael.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for your comprehensive and illuminating presentation, bringing much needed clarity and attention to the expulsion and the ensuing Sefarad diaspora. And now, allow me to introduce Blanca Carrasco, a converso or conversa, if you will, descendant of Marcos Alonso de la Gracia y de Arcon, co-founder of Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Blanca will share with us her life's experience and discoveries, and of returning to open practice of Judaism. Take it away, Blanca.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this webinar. And thank you, Ron. That was amazing. So, hi, everyone. I'm going to ask you to please bear with me. My name is Blanca Mónica Marina Garza Salinas Enriquez Espinosa Pérez Crispín. I am married to Cesar Joel Carrasco, Trejo, Ávila, Acosta, León, Cano, Cervero. The reason that I mention all these names is because when I first heard that our last names may be of Jewish or crypto-Jewish origin, is what caught my attention to learn more about Judaism. I was born in Torreón, Coahuila, Mexico, to a beautiful single young lady. and was raised as Blanca Mónica Enriquez Espinosa by my grandmother until I permanently moved to the border of Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, Mexico at age 5 with my older sister to live with my mom and her husband who adopted me and my older sister a few years later, officially changing my name to Blanca Mónica Beagle Enriquez. At age 20, we migrated to El Paso, Texas, and we have been living here since then. I was raised in the Catholic faith, and at early age, I was very immersed in volunteering and learning about the Bible. During college, as I was taking art history classes, as I was pursuing my graphic design degree, I was reading that many of the famous Madonnas and child paintings and sculptures found in Catholic churches were created by the artists using as models many times their lovers and their out of wedlock children. As I was learning these things, I rebelled and left the Catholic Church, arguing to my mom that I couldn't be praying or kneeling in front of these paintings and sculptures, especially if I could easily be doing them and then seeing people adoring them and doing crazy things, you know, just asking for miracles in their lives. I just couldn't keep seeing that in the Catholic Church, and I left. My mom asked me to leave her alone and not to come and try to proselytize her, which I did. I then embraced a non-denominational evangelical movement until I was invited to a presentation where the speaker introduced us to the Shabbat, the Jewish festivals, and told us that Jesus was a Jew who would easily have had brown skin and brown eyes, something that was totally unexpected for me to hear. That evening, it sparked my interest to learn more about Judaism. And when my husband and I were invited to attend a Passover Seder, I immediately said yes. During the Seder, I felt that the stories of the Bible that I have read since I was little just came to life right in front of my eyes. I could easily use my senses now. I could feel, I could touch, I could smell all this beautiful story. And that evening definitely made a huge change in my life again. I was committed to start learning more about something that was so distant from my family's experience, and yet it filled my heart with an indescribable sense of belonging. We left the Christian church, of course, and joined a Messianic movement, Christian Jewish place. I felt that I needed to be in this bridge, you know, wanting to learn more about Judaism, but yet I was afraid to leave Christianity, because what if I lose my salvation, right, through Jesus? So we started going to this Messianic center, and we worshiped and started congregation there. So it was in this place that I was fully introduced to the research that was being done in New Mexico by Stanley Hordes and Giblitz and many others about people of Hispanic descent who would recall their grandmothers lighting candles in a closet or not eating certain foods at certain times of the year, or people recalling unusual traditions at home that were not being connected, that are now being connected to crypto Jews, marranos, and osim. It was in this place that I met for the first time Rabbi Stephen Leon, who visited us during a service to teach some of his students what the Messianic movement taught. Rabbi Leon was there, the rabbi who was known in El Paso, Texas, a supporter of all the people who thought or knew they had Jewish ancestry and were interested in returning to the Jewish faith. It was a special day for many of us. At this time, I started inquiring with my mom and my aunts and uncles if they had known of something similar happening in our family. my mom and I were able to talk to my mom's 102-year-old grand aunt, who told us that her sister, my mom's maternal grandmother, used to speak Ladino whenever she wouldn't want her brothers to understand her. And that in the little town where they were from in Coahuila, Mexico, they used to cover the mirrors when there were funerals in the houses. For the longest time, this was my only connection, if I can say that, to what possibly might be my Jewish ancestry on my mom's maternal grandma's side, the Crispin last name. On my biological dad's side, I didn't know anything because although I knew his name was Israel Garza Salinas, and I knew where he possibly was from, I have never met him nor his family. In 2007, my family and I left the Messianic movement and reached out to Rabbi Leon to inquire about returning, converting to Judaism. In 2008, my husband and I officially converted and became members of the conservative synagogue in town. I embraced my conversion to Judaism and became very involved with the Jewish community in El Paso. I volunteered with the El Paso Jewish Federation and became a member of the board. I was awarded with a Young Leadership Award in 2012 and the Volunteer of the Year Award in 2014. Their monthly, I was also invited to become the editor and graphic designer of the Jewish Voice, their monthly newspaper, which I did for over 4 years. At Shul, I became a member of the Sisterhood and later the president and treasurer afterwards. I have been a board member of the Anosim Center, in which Rabbi Leon is founder, and Bill Carvajal, a direct descendant of one of Luis de Carvajal's family members, presides. I developed and edited an Ashuva newsletter. I support Rabbi Leon when he teaches a group of people in Mexico, translating his teachings into Spanish or translating questions or comments done in Spanish to English for him, and support him when he conducts his teachings in Zoom, via Zoom, due to the pandemic. In 2017, I decided to embark on a trip to find out who my biological father was, knowing only his name, and that he used to live in Monterrey, Mexico. It took me quite some time after my trip, but to my amazement, I found out that my father was a descendant of Marcos Alonso de la Garza y del Arcón, co-founder of Monterrey, Nuevo León, an important center for conversos and crypto Jews in Mexico since the time of Luis Carvajal and Diego de Montemayor. So now I have added more last names to my list that are known to be of Sephardic lineage: Cortés, Tijerina, Falcón, Garcia, Treviño, González, Sosa, Estrada, Aragón, just to name a few of the last names I found in my genealogical trees. In my father's patrilineal lineage, I was able to find from farmers to captains, colonizers, governors, and even dukes, and someone really important to me as a crypto Jew, 2 ancestors who perished during the Inquisition, who could have been my 13th grandmother, Constanza de la Garza, from Villa de Lepe, Reino de Castilla, Spain, who was accused of being a heretic and died in house arrest, but her effigy and her bones were burned in an auto de fe in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, alongside her brother, Alonso de la Garza. They were 2 of 5 people who atoned for their religious crimes in a bonfire in 1624. I am honored and humbled to be part of today's webinar. I understand that the topic of return, converso, crypto Judaism, is growing exponentially every day. And I'm happy to share my story to those of you who might be interested or know someone who is interested in researching their Jewish roots. It is possible to find out information. You just need to be very patient and arm yourself with all the tools available online to do it. I promise that by doing it, you will embark in an amazing journey. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Michael.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Blanca, for bringing the conversos side of the story to life by sharing your journey back to your Jewish roots. Amazing, amazing. I thank you very much. And I could see you're emotional, and so am I. So now it is my distinct honor to introduce our very own Dr. Isaac Amon, a descendant of Moses Amon, a Jewish physician to the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Isaac will share with us his family's odyssey from Spain to Turkey and beyond. Take it away, Isaac.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. And Blanca, thank you for sharing your family story. Thank you, Ron, for the great overview you gave of the complex decisions which confronted so many Sephardim in 1492. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be around the globe. It's an honor to address you again, this time on the subject of Sefarad, to be or not to be. In 1492, one of the most earth-shattering years in the annals of Jewish and world history, my global and centuries-old family odyssey began. The Book of Years records an Isaac Amon who served as a physician to Muhammad XII, or Boabdil, the last Nasrid Sultan of Granada, and who witnessed the surrender of the Alhambra to Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs, Los Reyes Católicos, in January 1492. Following the Edict of Expulsion in March, his son Joseph and infant grandson Moses did not convert or go west, but rather, shorn of everything they owned, except knowledge in their faith, headed east across the Mediterranean to Constantinople. Joseph became a physician to Sultan Bayezid II, who ruled from 1481 to 1512, and his son Selim I, who ruled from 1512 to 1520. He accompanied them on military expeditions, visiting Jewish communities in Egypt, Iraq, and Syria, where he ultimately died. Joseph's son Moses, as seen here on the right, rose even higher than his father in the esteem and service of the Sultan and his Jewish brethren. He served as physician, advisor, and diplomat to Suleiman the Magnificent, as seen in the center left image, throughout much of the latter's nearly half-century rule from 1520 to 1566. Moses funded schools and synagogues, paid Jewish scholars to translate great works into Turkish, Persian, and Arabic, and valiantly defended his co-religionists from infamous blood libel allegations, notably in the Turkish cities of Amasya and Tokat. He authored medical and dentistry textbooks. A copy, as seen here, is maintained in the Library of Congress and the National Library of Israel, carried out diplomatic missions, and persuaded Suleiman to intervene on Donia Gracia Naci's behalf with the Republic of Venice, allowing her to escape the Inquisition and come to the Ottoman Empire. Nicolas de Nicolay, a French envoy who met Moses at the Sublime Porte in the 1550s and sketched a portrait of him, as seen on the screen, wrote in his famed Peregrination, or Travels, that Moses, quote, had the first dignity, was of age about 60 years, a personage great of authority and much esteemed for his goods, knowledge, and renown, as for honor, end quote. Closer to our time, my great-great-grandfather, Isaac Amon Effendi, is the earliest known member of my directly traceable family branch. Born and raised in Istanbul, he was the teacher of mathematics, a rabbi, and a member of the communal council. As a sign of his immense prestige, he was offered the position of chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire around the time of the 1919 to 1923 Turkish War of Independence. Unwilling to become involved in political machinations, he declined the offer. Nonetheless, as a sign of the respect in which he was held, the Ottoman government bestowed upon him the title Effendi, a title of nobility equivalent to knighthood in the UK and rarely given to Jews. His wife and my grandfather's grandmother, Kaduna Jalvo Amon, as seen at the top right, was the granddaughter of the Gaon Haim Palagi or Palachi, the chief rabbi of Izmir in the 1850s and 60s, as seen on the bottom right. My grandfather's other grandfather, Nisim Cohen, seen in the center image, was the grandson of Jacob Avigdor, chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, or Hakambashi, during that same decade. My paternal grandfather, Dr. Rene Isaac Amon, of blessed memory, Alav Shalom, for whom I am named, as he was named for his grandfather, was a formative influence in my life. Born in December 1923, a month and a half after Ataturk proclaimed the Turkish Republic, he grew up in a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, multinational neighborhood in Istanbul. He was a polyglot, who spoke French with his parents, Ladino with his grandparents, Greek with his friends, Turkish in the streets, and Hebrew in school. He learned German and Russian for scientific and research purposes and perfected his English as an attaché between the Turkish army and the British military during the 1950 to 53 Korean War. As a teenager, he met Ataturk a few months before the president's death. He married my grandmother, Denise Safran Ahmad from Aleppo, Halab, or the biblical Aram Soba, by way of Beirut in Istanbul's Neve Shalom Synagogue in December 1952, as seen in these photos. Then Chief Rabbi Raphael David Saban presided over the ceremony. Cosmopolitan, urbane, and chic, educated at the Alliance Israelite Universelle. My grandparents were married for 6 decades and remained proudly Sephardic, yet fully at home wherever they lived, ranging from the former Ottoman Empire's territories, newly known as the Republic of Turkey, Turquia Cumhuriyeti, and the French Mandate for Syria and the Lebanon, Mandat pour la Syrie et le Liban, to their final and longest chapter in the United States as they crossed oceans, continents, and half the globe from Istanbul to Chicago in 1957. Yet they kept in touch with friends and relatives around the globe of different nationalities, religions, and backgrounds, believing everyone has something to contribute to the human quest for meaning in the cosmos. They helped to found Sephardic congregation in Evanston, Illinois, right outside Chicago in 1971, formerly called the Portuguese Israelite Fraternity, in homage to the worldwide circuit of the Spanish and Portuguese communities of the Western Sefaradim and the wider Sephardic melange throughout the United States. It served as a meeting place between East and West, between Sephardim from the former Ottoman Empire and the Maghreb, and those from Europe, from the Dar al-Islam and Christendom, but all with a common origin in ages past as Iberian Jews, forever parted by that infamous decree of 1492. My grandfather's interests were numerous and his curiosity insatiable. He continued to read works throughout his life in multiple languages, discuss religion, history, literature, mathematics, and movies, mentally lucid until the end, speaking in French, English, Turkish, and Ladino with friends and family in person and on the phone. Just a few days before his passing in October 2018, he impressed upon our family the importance of remembering these stories and traditions and passing them on to posterity, to those who will not know him except in our memories. He was truly a worthy heir to the legacy of Sefarad. Growing up, when I visited my grandparents in Chicago, I would often hear Ladino, Greek, Arabic, French, Hebrew, English, and Turkish, as that synagogue and their home became a melting pot for Sephardim in the Windy City. And when they visited us in St. Louis, they brought with them their Sephardic and Halabi linguistic, liturgical, cultural, and culinary traditions and practices such as huevos haminados, burecas, kibbeh, and lahmajin, which together with my Yiddish-speaking maternal Ashkenazi grandparents' journeys of surviving pogroms in Eastern Europe, finding refuge at Ellis Island, and thus the United States in the early 20th century, combating anti-Semitism at home, eating lox and bagels, cream cheese, and kugel, produced a uniquely enriching synthesis of diverse cultural, historical, and traditional approaches representing constitutive aspects of the global and millennia-old Jewish experience. Though they all now belong to the ages, I was privileged to grow up with them, love them, and learn from them. Their lessons, teachings, and stories continue to influence me. I hear them in memory. I see their footsteps alongside mine, and I feel their continuing presence, which will surely last all the days of my life. In August 2019, I went to Istanbul for the first time and visited the chief rabbinate, the Neve Shalom Synagogue, the apartment in which my grandfather grew up, met his cousin who still lives there, and located the graves of my grandfather's parents and grandfather, as shown earlier, whose epitaph in Turkish and Hebrew records nearly a century after his passing that he was honored by the nation for his contributions and mourned for by his people. My genetic story reveals today I have relatives on 5 continents. The Amon diaspora spans the globe. Members live in the United States, Costa Rica, Turkey, Israel, France, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and Australia, and several of them are surely listening in today. The late Yosef Hiram Yerushalmi, a famous 20th century scholar in his commanding work Zachor, notes that the Torah enjoins the children of Israel no less than 170 times to remember and to bear witness to the epoch-making events that formed our nation across the generations. 1492 confronted Isaac Abarbanel, Abraham Senior, and our ancestors with an existential challenge which would not impact them alone. Since that momentous date, 25 generations of descendants upon the face of the earth have held on to the legacy of Sefarad. For Isaac Abarbanel and the exiles of 1492, this was done through the conscious perpetuation of cuisine, language, dress, music, names. For Abraham Señor and those who remained in Spain as New Christians or Cristianos Nuevos, echoes of ancient Sephardic traditions, practices, and memories were subconsciously preserved and passed down in the face of unremitting inquisitorial persecution. As Shakespeare's Prince Hamlet famously asks, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, no more. The great expanses of space and time separate us. Our ancestors live on in our collective psyche and the recollection of our people, and in our DNA, the living embodiment in the scroll of family, Jewish, and human history. The calls of history, memory, and identity beckon to each of us today, as they surely did to all those who went before, and will to all those who are to follow. Let us carry this blazing torch and be the connecting link between our ancestors of old, who despite triumphs, trials, and tribulations, recreated Sefarad in miniature and remade the world, and our as yet unborn descendants. The Edict of Expulsion of March 31st, 1492, severed the unity of Sefarad, separated our ancestors, and altered the course of Jewish history. Yet in the end, hope springs eternal. Indeed, our virtual presence here today, ladies and gentlemen, North African and Eastern Sephardim, Western Sephardim and Bnei Anusim, Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, across scores of countries, on multiple continents, and dozens of time zones, bears witness to a singular truth, as expressed most stirringly by the late Jonathan Sacks, seen here, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, a man I once had the honor to meet in person. We did not come from nowhere, nor does our story end with us. We are chapters in a long and still being written story, a letter in the scroll of the book of the people of the book. Take it, cherish it, learn to understand and to love it, and pass it on to future generations, for you are a member of an eternal people. Let their eternity live on in you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you for sharing your Sefarad heritage and for your ongoing guidance as we forge ahead in our efforts to bring much needed attention to the Sefarad legacy. In closing, I'd like to thank our speakers for an amazing presentation. And once again, I also would like to thank you, our audience, for your continued interest and support of our programs. As you know, Jewish Heritage Alliance brings you informative and entertaining educational webinar programs year-round. We ask you to support our efforts so that we may continue providing you with more excellent educational webinars. Please take a moment to copy or to click onto our donation page appearing on your screen. We thank you for your continued interest and support. Please note that Jewish Heritage Alliance will bring you multi-level programming going into 2022, including visits to locations in Spain and Portugal intended to bring the Sefarad stories to life. Our next webinar will take place on January 30th, 2022. Be on the lookout for our and our co-hosting partners' announcements with details and registration information. Thank you for making this event a success. See you next time. And now we will go into our Q&A. Take it away, Isaac.
Thank you, Michael. We have a number of questions here, and I apologize, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm unable to get to everyone. But I guess trying to see how to break this up. We have some questions regarding the expulsion, and Ron, you briefly, you touched on this. I guess the first question is, was the expulsion of 1492 inevitable?
You know, it probably was inevitable. Because given the circumstances, the crusade mentality that had been developed, that was there, and particularly among the generations that had fought the crusade battles and the Reconquista against the Muslims, apparently there had developed an exclusionary attitude in which it really became Christian only. And given that background, once the Muslims were defeated and driven out at the beginning of 1492, the next step was to purify Spain. The the other thing, at this point, remember, nation states were just being created, and Spain was one of the first nation states to come into existence. Now, I mean, France and England had clearly existed. Italy was still divided into sections. Germany was divided into sections. Spain had, the four kingdoms, and they were trying to unite. Ferdinand and Isabella were trying to make a united Spain. And what they understood in this process was they had to create one language, and they believed they had to create one religion. And so to create their concept of Spain, because there were multiple languages in Spain at that point, there had been multiple religions, and they started this process of eliminating the religions, eliminating the other languages. Then Castellano then became the language of Spain. And so it was that big process. The other thing that probably deserves being mentioned in this case is that Ferdinand and Isabella were they were the power couple of their age. They not only created a united Spain, which had not existed before. In fact, each of them were king and queen of different kingdoms within Spain. So they united the whole thing, drove out the Muslims. But they also managed to have their children intermarried with all the major royal houses of Europe. And we find Henry VIII in England marrying Catherine, one of their daughters. And so it went. So, they were a power couple, and they were going to create something, and the Jews were in their way, and Jews had to go.
Right. So going on that, you mentioned that, of course, the expulsion, the date of the expulsion or the edict was moved up to August 2nd, which coincided on the Jewish calendar with Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av. Did Ferdinand and Isabella know that was the date, or the significance thereof?
That is a very interesting question. They probably didn't. But the interesting thing is, Abarbanel would have known. And so I don't know to what extent when they were negotiating this, I've always wondered. It's one of those great historical curiosities. Right. Did Abarbanel know this? Did he have some influence in having him move 2 days? It's a very good question.
Now, when the Reconquista was coming to its end, when the Muslims were finally driven out and expelled, did Jews support or oppose the rise of the Spanish in the Reconquista? And did they have any idea how the Spanish would treat them?
Jews were involved in this, and many, Abarbanel and Signor, for example, they were in the royal court. So they were supporting this process. Many Jews were. So, but the thing is, I don't think they understood the end result that was going to come. And as we talked about in a parallel case in Germany, there were not so many, but there were some Jews that did support the beginning of that government before they understood what it totally meant. And I think the same thing happened in Spain.
Okay, here's a question. Thank you, Ron. Here's a question for Blanca. How was your return in this whole process that you went through, which thank you again for sharing? How was it viewed by family and friends?
Well, again, since I transitioned from the Messianic, right, still believing in Jesus, and although not practicing many things in the Christian faith, but I could still relate to them with Jesus or Christmas, Easter. But once I moved and reached out to Rabbi Leon and told them that we no longer believed in Jesus, or that he was God, or that he was the Son of God, that's when they got it hard. It hit hard, particularly because they were afraid of me losing my salvation, right? That's the bottom part. Anyhow, it was easier on my mom's side, on my family side, because eventually my mom, who was the one who invited me to listen to that person, Jonathan Setel, who's the one who taught us about Judaism, and she left the Catholic Church. She started going into evangelical church, and the pastor was always teaching them that you need to love the Jewish people, and we are going to learn about the Shabbat. So they were already, you know, we were kind of talking the same language. On my husband's side, although they were not a practicing Catholics, they felt betrayed. So it took us several years until they understood that we don't need pork, we don't need this, we don't practice that. Now we practice these other things. But little by little, they started respecting it and understanding that that was our passion and that's what we wanted to live. And they ended up respecting it, perhaps not accepting it, but respecting it. Thank you.
And what is the role of, now this could go to perhaps Blanca or Ron, but what is the role of genetic and DNA testing? We have several questions on this and identifying crypto Jews or perhaps reclaiming one's Judaism today. How big a role does that play in the reclamation of identity?
I mean, I can, if Ron, I can say something, then you can speak on the other side. But we did, my whole family did the DNA testing, and my husband and my daughter showed Sephardim, whereas my son and myself show Ashkenazi DNA, not in big percentages, but it shows on the results. So when I see, I guess one of the most interesting things about doing the DNA, it's all the people that are cousins, right? Because now you're gonna see your first or second or third cousin. And I can see all these last names are very, very familiar to us. Levi, Levine, Asher, Greenberg, and many of the traditional mainstream Judaism last names that we are now familiar with. They are my cousins alongside the others that I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about. So if anything, my new mantra became, we are all cousins, you know, because definitely we share DNA, regardless of the many years or the places where we might be living, we are cousins.
So one of the things on DNA that I understand, DNA is not accepted in Jewish practice as an indication of, so DNA is not accepted halakhically if you're returned to Judaism. And in fact, my understanding in the Sephardic return legislation in Spain, DNA was not accepted. So you have to show genealogies, you have to show parental background and things of that sort. So there is that issue with DNA. It is interesting in terms of what it can show and provide, but in the end, it's not accepted either in Israel or in Spain as confirmation of being Jewish. You know?
Right. And now going actually into, as a segue, because you mentioned this, the law of return, the right of return, so to speak, proffered by Spain and Portugal. They offered this legislation, at least in theory, offering citizenship to descendants of those impacted by the Edict of Expulsion as a form of compensation or reparations. But of course, many problems exist. Was this offer genuine? A lot of questions on that. If you just wanted to give your view, kind of how this ties into, in the end, how does Spain view the events of 1492 today?
You know, the interesting thing is that Spain finally revoked the Edict of Expulsion in 1968. very, very late. Now, we're in Jews in Spain before that, so there was a don't ask, don't tell policy before, but it took a long time to actually revoke it. And the government that passed the legislation, there are many questions. We can get into an entire discussion of why they passed that legislation to start with. But there have been reinterpretations of the law and the policy later. And as many of you might know, in the last year or so, there have been many, many more rejections of the applications than there were initially. And one of the things I might just add, just in passing, the member of Congress from our district here in northern New Mexico, Teresa Leger Fernandez, has in her own background a converso tradition, which she openly speaks about and embraces. And she's become one of the leaders in protesting what this policy change in Spain, protesting that, inviting people to apply for application, and then now, in a sense, seeming to withdraw that open invitation by so many rejections. So it's the work of Teresa Leger, the American Sephardi Federation, and other groups have really tried to challenge what is happening right now.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, we only have time for one or two more questions here. So let's see. If you could just speak just a little bit on, for either of you. And there's actually one that's, I guess, one for me, one for Blanca, but it goes into, it says, of course, Blanca, your story and mine are not the same. Our ancestors didn't face the same struggles. And so to the questioner, I would say, it's not just the presentation. I didn't suffer with my identity, but I think that really goes to showcase the difference between the descendants of those who left Iberia or the peninsula entirely, were able to remain openly Jewish, and those who were converted and had to hide it for generations. I think that's really the difference, but ultimately it still goes back to the same place, to the same origin in Sefarad. I guess, let's see, Blanca, I'll ask you, some people, well, where's this? Yes, that, well, Ron, I asked you a question, then Blanca a question. Ron, has anyone written about the Jews who left Spain and wound up in Eastern Europe?
That's an interesting question. That's an area that really does need to be studied. Now, we do know some cases that have been studied in some detail, like Chaim Solomon, who was Sephardic descent. The family moved to Poland, and then he arrived in the United States and became known as the financier of the revolution, in a sense. He helped raise so much of the money for Washington and the troops at that time. His story is fairly well known. So we know some individual stories like this, but this is an area which would be great if someone could do more detailed studies on it. Absolutely.
And then Blanca, you, of course, you're in El Paso. I'm curious to know more about the return of the B'nai Anusim, and I think we can wrap up with this question. How is that going about? I think, Ron, you mentioned thousands or tens of thousands are returning. What is it like in El Paso and throughout the Americas in terms of this return to Judaism amongst converso descendants?
Based on my experience, particularly working with Rabbi Leon and the Anusim Center, many people are interested in returning. Many are interested in just learning if they happen to have Jewish ancestry and not really wanting to convert. But for those who want to convert, they're having a hard time finding a place or a synagogue that will be opening their doors to them. In El Paso, Texas, we have very welcoming and opening congregations, and it's a cool thing that they can reach out to Rabbi Leon, but at the same time, if they're living far away from El Paso, where are they actually going to congregate, where they're actually going to be able to bring their family and to teach their family and immerse them in the Jewish life. So it's a challenge. I think that for what the Jewish Heritage Alliance is doing, and Rabbi Leon and many, many other rabbis like Rabbi Leon with that passion to bring back the people, I think more communities, more synagogues are opening, are being open to welcome them and to teach them. And like I said, we want to pray with you. We want to mourn with you. Allow us to do that. Let us go back to bringing back our lost Jewish ancestry. So I thank everyone who's really working hard to change the dynamics and to change, the word as to let's bring you in, let's make you part of our family again.
Well, thank you very much, Blanca and Ron. It's been amazing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's all the time we have today. As you see, it's a fairly complex subject. Thank you again for allowing me to present. I look forward to continuing to speak with you, ladies and gentlemen, around the world. And Michael, I turn it back to you.
Well, we will close it here. I will just remind everyone that our mission is about telling the story of Sefarad. As you can see, it's a very complex story with many moving parts. I just suggest and invite each and every one of you to follow us. And we intend to bring you many, many more programs that will delve into the complexities of the story and the many moving parts. So join us next time and watch for our newsletters and those of our co-hosting partners. We thank you for joining us here today, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.